September 10, 1943. 8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe, England. The photograph trembled slightly in Major General Ira Eaker's hand as he examined the reconnaissance image taken over Schweinfurt 3 weeks earlier. He had studied these images dozens of times since August 17th, but each viewing brought the same uncomfortable realization. The supposedly precision strikes that cost him 60 flying fortresses had missed their mark more often than they had hit it. Through his office windows overlooking the Chilterns countryside, he could see crews preparing for another deep penetration mission into Germany. Young men who believed absolutely in the technological superiority of American bombing equipment. What neither Eaker nor his bombardiers yet understood was that the device they trusted with their lives, the secret weapon that had cost more than half the Manhattan Project's budget, was performing no better in combat than educated guesswork with a slide rule. The Norden bombsight, sitting in the nose of every B-17 flying fortress, was supposed to deliver bombs within 75 feet of the target from 20,000 feet altitude. The reality over German targets was measuring closer to 1,200 feet average error, a 16-fold degradation that was costing American lives while German factories continued production almost uninterrupted. The mathematical certainty of precision bombing was collapsing not because American engineering had failed, but because the gap between laboratory perfection and combat reality was far wider than anyone in Washington had dared to admit. The psychological transformation was already underway, though few yet recognized it. On that sweltering August afternoon over Schweinfurt, American bombardiers had watched their bombs fall wide, while German flak tore through their formations with devastating accuracy. The irony was profound and bitter. German gunners using far simpler equipment were hitting. American bombers with greater precision than American bombardiers were hitting German factories with their billion-dollar miracle device. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The story of this technological overconfidence had begun 2 decades earlier when the United States Navy decided it needed a way to bomb enemy ships from high altitude with devastating accuracy. Naval warfare doctrine of the 1920s assumed that future conflicts would be decided by massive battleship engagements, in which aircraft could provide crucial support by disabling or sinking enemy vessels from above. But dropping bombs from moving aircraft at high altitude onto moving targets below required solving mathematical problems that exceeded human calculation speed. The Navy's Bureau of Ordnance approached Carl Norden, a Swiss-born engineer with experience in gyroscopic systems, to develop a solution. What Norden created over the next decade would become the most expensive conventional weapon project of World War II. Carl Lucas van Norden was not a typical weapons designer. Born in Java in 1880 to Dutch parents, educated in Switzerland, emigrating to America in 1904, Norden brought European precision engineering sensibility to American military problems. He was a perfectionist who personally trained workers to manufacture ball bearings for his bombsight because existing American production did not meet his exacting standards. The company he founded to produce these bearings, Baden, still exists today in an ironic twist of history as part of the German FAG ball bearing group headquartered in Schweinfurt, one of the very factories his bombsights repeatedly attacked during the war. Norden's design philosophy emphasized mechanical precision over operational simplicity. The Mark 15 bombsight he delivered to the Navy in 1931 combined 3 revolutionary elements. First, a gyroscopically stabilized platform that remained level regardless of aircraft maneuvers. Second, an analog computer that continuously calculated bomb trajectory based on altitude, airspeed, wind drift, and bomb ballistics. Third, an autopilot system that allowed the bombardier to fly the aircraft during the final bomb run, making corrections far more precisely than pilots could manually. In testing under ideal conditions from 4,000 feet altitude, the prototype achieved a circular error probable of 35 feet. From higher altitudes during 80 test drops, the CEP measured 75 feet. This meant that half of all bombs dropped under perfect conditions landed within 75 feet of the aiming point. The performance was extraordinary for its era. No other bombsight in the world could match these results. The British stabilized automatic bombsight, while sophisticated, could not achieve comparable accuracy. German bomb sites of the early 1930s relied on simpler vector calculation methods that were less precise. Japanese forces never developed anything approaching Norden's complexity. The device seemed to promise a revolution in aerial warfare. Strategic bombing could now target specific factories, rail yards, power plants, and military installations with surgical precision. Collateral damage to civilian areas could theoretically be minimized. The entire doctrine of American air power in World War II would be built on this technological promise. The United States Army Air Corps acquired its first Norden bombsight in 1932 after observing Navy testing results. Army aviators were equally impressed by the device's capabilities. Between 1932 and America's entry into World War II in December 1941, Norden refined his design through multiple iterations. The M-series that equipped American bombers during the war incorporated improvements in gyroscope, stability, computer calculation speed, and optical quality. Each bombsight cost $8,800 to produce, equivalent to roughly $170,000 in 2025 dollars. The complete system, including the separate stabilizer unit, cost $13,000 per aircraft. By war's end, approximately 90,000 Norden bombsights had been manufactured at a total program cost exceeding $1.1 billion in 1940s dollars, equivalent to roughly $17 billion today. To put this expenditure in perspective, the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb cost approximately $2.2 billion. The Norden bombsight program consumed half as much money as building the first nuclear weapons. It cost more than a quarter of the entire production budget for all B-17 flying fortresses built during the war. This was not merely a piece of equipment. It represented a strategic bet by the United States that precision bombing technology could win wars while minimizing civilian casualties and reducing the exposure of American ground forces to enemy fire. The security surrounding the Norden bombsight reflected its perceived importance. Bombardiers swore oaths not to reveal how the device worked if captured by enemy forces. The bombsights were stored in climate-controlled vaults under armed guard when not installed in aircraft. During training missions and combat operations, 2 armed guards accompanied any technician carrying a Norden between storage and aircraft. The device was covered whenever not actively in use. Bombardiers received instructions to destroy their bombsights if forced to land behind enemy lines, initially by shooting them with their sidearms, though there is no record of this destruction method ever being used. The entire apparatus was designated secret, the highest security classification below top secret. Even British allies were initially denied access to Norden technology. Despite repeated requests at the highest diplomatic levels, the propaganda value of the Norden bombsight matched its tactical importance. American newspapers and magazines published breathless accounts of the device's capabilities under headlines promising technological dominance over Axis forces. The phrase that bombardiers could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 20,000 feet became an accepted fact, repeated in countless news articles, radio broadcasts, and training films. With a 20-power telescope, the bombardier supposedly could see individual buildings, roads, even vehicles from 4 miles altitude. The analog computer would calculate the exact release point, accounting for every variable affecting bomb trajectory. The autopilot would fly the bomber steadily to that mathematically perfect release point. German and Japanese factories would be destroyed with minimal wasted ordnance. The war would be won through American technological superiority and industrial capacity. This confidence permeated American military planning for the combined bomber offensive against Germany. Unlike the British Royal Air Force, which had adopted nighttime area bombing after suffering unsustainable losses in daylight raids during 1940 and 1941, the United States Army Air Forces committed to daylight precision bombing. The reasoning seemed unassailable. With the Norden bombsight, American bombardiers could identify and hit specific factory buildings, oil refineries, rail junctions, and military installations. Destroying these precisely selected targets would cripple German war production far more effectively than indiscriminately bombing entire cities. Civilian casualties would be minimized, the moral high ground would be maintained, bomber losses would be justified by the military value of targets destroyed. Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, commanding RAF Bomber Command, viewed these American plans with considerable skepticism. Harris had watched British bombers equipped with sophisticated bombsights attempt precision attacks in 1940 and 1941 with disastrous results. German flak and fighters had slaughtered unescorted bombers. Even when British aircraft reached their targets, bombing accuracy proved abysmal. Post-war analysis revealed that during 1941, only 1 in 3 RAF bombs fell within 5 miles of the intended target. The small, precise targets the Americans intended to hit, Harris knew from bitter experience, were nearly impossible to strike even in favorable conditions. The Americans insisted their technology was superior. British skepticism was dismissed as reflecting outdated equipment and inadequate training. The Norden bombsight was revolutionary. American bombardiers trained for months to master its operation. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator bombers carried heavy defensive armament that would allow them to fight their way to and from targets without fighter escort. The doctrine of daylight precision bombing would vindicate itself once operations began in earnest over occupied Europe and Germany itself. What neither American planners nor Norden engineers adequately understood was the enormous gulf between controlled testing conditions and operational combat reality. The testing that produced those remarkable 75-foot accuracy figures had been conducted from relatively low altitudes in perfect weather, with no enemy opposition, while bombing static targets on ranges where wind conditions were measured precisely before each drop. Combat operations over Germany would involve none of these favorable conditions. American heavy bombers typically operated at altitudes between 20,000 and 25,000 feet to stay above the effective ceiling of most German anti-aircraft guns. At these altitudes, temperatures inside unheated, unpressurized bombers dropped to 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. The Norden bombsight's precision, mechanisms, requiring tolerances finer than a watch, were wrapped in electrically heated blankets to prevent lubricating oils from congealing and optical elements from fogging. Even with heating, the extreme cold affected performance in ways that had not been anticipated during development. European weather conditions posed challenges that American testing had never encountered. Cloud cover over targets was common, often making visual bombing impossible. Industrial haze from German factories obscured aiming points. Contrails from bomber formations sometimes created artificial cloud cover that interfered with bombardiers' view of targets. Smoke from fires started by earlier bombing waves drifted across subsequent aiming points. In practice, bombardiers often could not see their targets clearly until seconds before bomb release, leaving insufficient time for the Norden's analog computer to settle on accurate solutions. German anti-aircraft fire created additional accuracy problems that testing had not replicated. Heavy flak forced bombers to fly evasive patterns approaching targets. Although bombardiers took control through the Norden's autopilot during the final bomb run, maintaining straight and level flight under intense anti-aircraft fire required extraordinary discipline. The concussion from nearby flak bursts physically shook the aircraft, disturbing Norden's delicate gyroscopes. Pilots, seeing their wingmen explode from direct hits, sometimes broke formation and took evasive action despite orders to maintain course, disrupting the careful calculations the bombsight was performing. Luftwaffe fighter attacks added another dimension of inaccuracy. German fighters concentrated their assaults during bomb runs when American bombers were most vulnerable, flying straight and level under bombardier control. Watching tracer fire slash through formation while bombs were being released, seeing aircraft on either wing tumble out of the sky with engines aflame, knowing that your bomber might be next. These psychological stresses affected even the most experienced bombardiers. The Norden bombsight required steady hands and calm focus to operate effectively. Combat conditions provided neither. The mechanical complexity of the Norden bombsight created reliability problems that emerged only during sustained combat operations. The device contained over 2,000 moving parts, including 61 precision ball bearings, rough handling during aircraft landings, turbulence en route to targets, vibration from the bomber's 4 engines, electrical surges, inadequate lubrication. These factors caused breakdowns that required constant maintenance. Spare parts were often in short supply. Many missions were flown with bomb sights that were out of specification, missing targets by hundreds of feet, simply because the equipment was not functioning within design parameters. But perhaps the most significant factor degrading Norden accuracy was one that American doctrine had specifically rejected as unnecessary. British experience had proven that individual aircraft bombing individually could not achieve acceptable results. The RAF had developed the lead bomber technique where Pathfinder aircraft marked targets for following waves. The United States initially insisted this was unnecessary given American technological superiority, but combat losses from German fighters attacking dispersed formations forced adoption of tight defensive formations, where dozens of bombers flew wingtip to wingtip. In these combat box formations, only the lead bombardier in each group actually used his Norden bombsight to aim. All other bombardiers simply released when they saw the lead aircraft's bombs drop. This meant that the celebrated accuracy of dozens of individual Norden bombsights was irrelevant. Only one bombsight per formation was actually performing the precision calculations. If the lead bombardier's aim was off by several hundred feet, every bomb in the formation was off by that same margin. The billion-dollar investment in Norden technology was effectively reduced to betting everything on a few lead bombardiers per mission, while everyone else simply toggled their releases in sync with the leaders. The results of this reality became undeniable during the summer and fall of 1943 as the 8th Air Force ramped up operations over Germany. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission of August 17, 1943, provided one of the starkest examples of the gap between Norden promises and combat performance. This ambitious double strike aimed to hit Messerschmitt aircraft factories at Regensburg and ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, two targets that American intelligence identified as critical bottlenecks in German war production. A total of 376 B-17 flying fortresses took off from bases in East Anglia. Each aircraft carried a Norden bombsight. Each bombardier had been trained for months in its operation. The weather over targets was clear. If precision bombing was going to work, this mission should have demonstrated it. The Regensburg force of 146 bombers under Colonel Curtis LeMay's command encountered German fighters immediately after crossing the enemy coast. Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Focke W-1, 90s attacked in waves, concentrating on the trailing formations. By the time the surviving bombers reached Regensburg, 15 aircraft had been shot down or fatally damaged. The anti-aircraft fire over the target was described as light, visibility was excellent, and of the remaining 131 bombers, 126 dropped 298.7 to 5 tons of bombs on the Messerschmitt factories, with what was officially recorded as a high degree of accuracy. British observers who examined reconnaissance photographs after the mission were genuinely astonished by the results. The concentration of bomb strikes on the factory complex exceeded anything RAF Bomber Command had achieved against similar-sized targets. Post-mission analysis suggested the attack had cost Germany up to 900 frontline fighters in lost production and had destroyed the assembly jigs for Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighter fuselages, setting back Germany's jet program by months. This was precision bombing at its best. The Norden bombsight had performed as advertised under nearly ideal conditions: clear weather, experienced crews, minimal flak, and a target that could be clearly identified from altitude. It seemed to vindicate the entire doctrine. The Schweinfurt force told a different story. The second wave of 230 B-17 seconds under Brigadier General Robert Williams was supposed to follow 10 minutes behind the Regensburg force, splitting German fighter defences. But fog over English bases delayed takeoff by 3 hours. German radar tracked the holding pattern. Luftwaffe fighters that had engaged the Regensburg force landed, refueled, rearmed, and repositioned to intercept Schweinfurt-bound bombers with full ammunition and fuel. The slaughter began over Belgium and continued all the way to the target and back. When the Schweinfurt force finally reached their target, German anti-aircraft guns had the range and altitude perfectly calibrated. Flak burst throughout the formations with deadly precision. Bomber after bomber fell out of the sky. Those that survived to the bomb run flew through an inferno of exploding shells while trying to maintain the steady flight path the Norden bombsight required. Bombardiers watched aircraft on either wing disintegrate. They felt their own bombers shudder from nearby explosions. They saw parachutes blossoming beneath them as crews abandoned dying aircraft, and they tried to keep their hands steady on the Norden's controls while the analog computer calculated release points. The bombs fell. Reconnaissance photographs taken afterward showed that in some hit ball-bearing factories, many did not. Of the 230 bombers that had departed England, 36 were shot down over Germany. Another 24 were so badly damaged they crash-landed in England or had to be written off. Approximately 100 more sustained varying degrees of battle damage. Total American losses for both missions combined reached 60 B-17 seconds, destroyed outright with hundreds of additional aircraft damaged. Over 550 airmen were killed, wounded, or captured. This represented a loss rate exceeding 15% of the attacking force, an unsustainable casualty rate by any military standard. Intelligence officers immediately began analyzing whether the losses were justified by results achieved. The Regensburg results seemed excellent. The Schweinfurt results were harder to assess. Some bombs had clearly struck the ball-bearing factories. Production capacity had been reduced, though estimates varied wildly. German armaments minister Albert Speer would later claim the raid had genuinely worried German leadership because ball bearings were indeed a critical component. But he also noted that Germany had substantial stockpiles and alternative sources from Sweden, Switzerland, and Italy. Within weeks, ball-bearing production had largely recovered by dispersing manufacturing and drawing on reserves. More critically, post-war analysis revealed that even the officially successful Regensburg attack had not been as accurate as initial assessments suggested. While bomb concentration appeared good from reconnaissance photographs, significant numbers of bombs had fallen outside the factory complex entirely. The high degree of accuracy mentioned in reports meant that bombs were clustered relatively close together, not that they had all hit their intended aim points. The distinction was crucial. The Norden bombsight could produce consistent bombing patterns, but those patterns were often offset from the actual target by hundreds or even thousands of feet. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The second Schweinfurt raid on October 14, 1943 provided even more devastating evidence of the gap between Norden promises and combat reality. Having rebuilt their forces after August's losses, the 8th Air Force dispatched 291 B-17 seconds to strike the ball-bearing factories again. The mission planning incorporated lessons from August. More fighter escorts were provided, though P-47 Thunderbolts still lacked the range to accompany bombers all the way to Schweinfurt and back. The entire force would attack Schweinfurt simultaneously, rather than splitting between multiple targets. Every bomber carried a Norden bombsight. Bombardiers had been practicing their skills for months. If precision bombing could work, this mission should demonstrate it. The weather over England was poor, forcing some groups to cancel participation. Those that took off struggled to form up in proper combat box formations. German radar detected the reduced force and vectored fighters to intercept. What followed became known as Black Thursday, one of the bloodiest days in American aviation history. Luftwaffe fighters attacked in coordinated waves from the moment American P-47 escorts reached their range limit and turned back. The German pilots had refined their tactics since August. They concentrated on lead aircraft, knowing that killing the lead bombardiers would degrade accuracy for entire formations. They attacked from head-on at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour, giving American gunners only seconds to engage. They used rockets and large-caliber cannon that could destroy B-17 seconds with single hits. By the time the battered formations reached Schweinfurt, the bomber stream had been scattered. Aircraft flew in ragged groups rather than tight defensive formations. Some groups arrived over the target minutes apart rather than simultaneously. German anti-aircraft gunners had time to concentrate fire on each wave as it approached. The bombardiers who survived to reach their bomb release points were exhausted from hours of combat, traumatized by watching friends die, and flying in aircraft that were often shot full of holes and barely controllable. The bombs fell anyway, Some 229 of the 291 bombers that had departed England dropped their ordnance on Schweinfurt. The bombing was recorded as occurring in two groups. The first bombing between 1439 and 1445 hours, the second between 1451 and 1457 hours. Post-war analysis revealed that bombs struck the city area and some ball-bearing plants, but accuracy was far worse than August. Many bombs fell in residential areas. Some missed the city entirely. The survivors of the 40th Bomb Group, considered one of the more accurate units, managed to place 53% of their bombs within 1,000 feet of the aim point. This was considered good performance under the circumstances. Consider what that statistic actually meant. The Norden bombsight had been designed to place bombs within 75 feet of the target. Under ideal testing conditions, it had demonstrated this capability. In combat over Schweinfurt, one of the best-performing groups achieved 53% of bombs within 1,000 feet. The other 47% fell outside that circle. The device was performing more than 13 times worse than its design specifications, and these were the good results. Many other groups performed far worse, with bombs scattering across the landscape in patterns that resembled area bombing more than precision strikes. The cost was staggering. 60 B-17 seconds were shot down during the mission. 2 more were damaged beyond repair. 13 others sustained such heavy damage they barely made it home. Casualties amounted to 5 killed in action, 40 wounded in action, and 594 missing in action, most of them now dead or prisoners of war. American bomber crews claimed to have shot down 186 Luftwaffe fighters. German records showed actual losses of 35 to 38 aircraft. The exchange ratio was catastrophically unfavorable to the United States. At this rate, the 8th Air Force would be completely destroyed before Germany's industrial capacity was significantly impaired. General Henry Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces from Washington, initially tried to downplay the losses, calling the loss of 60 bombers incidental to the larger strategic picture. But field commanders knew better. Deep penetration daylight bombing raids into Germany were suspended until February 1944, when long-range P-51 Mustang escorts became available in sufficient numbers. The entire doctrine of unescorted precision bombing had collapsed under the weight of combat reality. The Norden bombsight, regardless of its theoretical capabilities, could not deliver precision results under the conditions that actually existed over German targets. Statistical analysis compiled throughout 1943 revealed the grim truth about Norden bombsight performance in combat. The 8th Air Force put only 31.8% of its bombs within 1,000 feet of the aim point from an average altitude of 21,000 feet. The 15th Air Force operating from Italy averaged 30.7 to 8% from 20,500 feet. The 20th Air Force bombing Japan averaged 31% from 16,500 feet. These were the official figures representing performance across all missions, not just the disasters. 1/3 of bombs were landing within 1/5 of a mile of where they were aimed. 2/3 were falling outside, in that circle, often by substantial distances. Several studies revealed even worse performance. As few as 5% of 8th Air Force bombs fell within 1,000 feet during some periods of 1943. The average error for 500-pound bombs dropped in Europe was measured at 1,673 feet, over a quarter mile. There were examples of hundreds of bombs aimed at single small targets with only 1 or 2 bombs actually striking the target. Some gross errors were measured in miles, bombs falling on the wrong towns entirely because bombardiers had identified the wrong landmarks through their Norden telescopes. In late 1944, quality control inspections revealed that up to 75% of some batches of newly manufactured Norden bombsights fell short of specifications, missing targets by 280 feet from 20,000 feet altitude when design specifications called for 50-foot accuracy. This represented a 6-fold degradation from design standards before the devices even entered combat. The complexity of manufacturing 2,000 precision parts to tolerances finer than watchmaking proved beyond the capabilities of wartime mass production. Norden himself had trained workers personally to make ball bearings because existing manufacturing was inadequate. But the military needed 90,000 bombsights, far more than any small batch precision manufacturing could supply. Quality inevitably suffered. The operational problems extended beyond manufacturing quality. Bombardiers were supposed to undergo extensive training, but the expansion of American bomber forces meant training programs were shortened to rush crews into combat. Many bombardiers flew missions with insufficient practice on the Norden's complex operation. The device was sensitive to proper setup and calibration. The stabilizing platform had to be carefully leveled before each mission, a time-consuming process that was sometimes rushed. Altitude, airspeed, wind direction, wind velocity, bomb ballistics, all these factors had to be set correctly, or the analog computer would calculate incorrect release points. Even experienced, well-trained bombardiers using properly calibrated equipment faced challenges that negated the Norden's precision. The simple act of rising from the bombardier's seat as bomb release approached changed the optical path length through the sighting telescope by a fraction of an inch. This tiny change could translate to dozens of feet of error on the ground. Many bombardiers unconsciously tensed and rose slightly as release approached, consistently introducing this error without realizing it. The psychological stress of combat, the fear of dying, the exhaustion from hours of flight in freezing conditions, the inability to fight back against flak, all degraded the steady focus the Norden required. The ultimate irony of the Norden Bombsight program emerged only after the war when American intelligence officers interrogated captured Luftwaffe personnel. The Germans had known virtually everything about the Norden's design and capabilities since before the war started. Hermann Lang, a naturalized American citizen of German birth who worked as an inspector at the Norden factory in Manhattan during the 1930s, had been recruited by the German Abwehr intelligence service. Lang had served as a Nazi stormtrooper in Germany between 1923 and 1927 before emigrating to America. His patriotism remained with Germany. In 1938, Lang gained access to Norden bombsight blueprints and hand-copied them from memory during a vacation trip to Germany. He met with Luftwaffe technical experts and reconstructed the complete plans, receiving 10,000 Reichsmarks for his efforts. The plans were smuggled to Germany via ocean liner. Lang returned to his job in America and continued working at the Norden factory, undetected, until 1941, when he was betrayed by a double agent. He was arrested as part of the Duquesne spy ring, the largest espionage prosecution in American history, with 33 agents convicted. Lang received an 18-year prison sentence for espionage. The damage had already been done. German engineers built a full-scale mock-up of the Norden bombsight and compared it to their own Lotfernrohr 7 bombsight then entering Luftwaffe service. The German Lotfe 7 was dramatically simpler in design, consisting of a single metal box with a mirror tube extending downward. It combined the functions of the Norden's separate stabilizer and sighting head into one integrated unit. The controls were simpler, just 3 large knurled knobs that could be differentiated by touch. Operation was similar to the Norden, but required less training. Most importantly, the Lotfe 7 could be operated by a single crew member, allowing its use in single-seat aircraft, like the Arado R-2-34 jet bomber. German testing concluded the Lotfe 7 was adequate for Luftwaffe needs. Captured Lotfe 7 devices, examined by Allied technical intelligence, were judged comparable in accuracy to the Norden under operational conditions. Post-war analysis in 1944 revealed the German bombsight offered a circular error probable of 890 feet, roughly equivalent to what the Norden was actually achieving in combat, even though the Norden was far more complex and expensive. The Germans had examined the stolen Norden plans, learned what they could, and then built something simpler that performed just as well in actual use. The entire American security apparatus surrounding the Norden bombsight had been theater. The armed guards, the storage vaults, the oaths of secrecy, the propaganda about technological superiority, all of it had been based on the assumption that the device was a war-winning secret that must be protected at all costs. In reality, the enemy had possessed complete plans for years and had concluded the design was interesting but unnecessary. German doctrine emphasized dive bombing and tactical air support rather than high-altitude strategic bombing, so precision from high altitude was less critical. German engineers could have built Norden copies if they had wanted. They chose not to because simpler solutions were adequate. The security classification was finally downgraded in 1944 after hundreds of Norden-equipped bombers had been shot down over enemy territory. Allied officials recognized that the Germans must have examined captured bomb sites by then. There was no point maintaining extreme secrecy around a device the enemy had studied extensively. In November 1944, a Norden bomb site was publicly displayed for the first time. Details of its operation began appearing in newspapers and magazines. The mystique started to fade, but the propaganda value of the Norden legend persisted. Carl Norden's company continued promoting the device's capabilities in advertisements and press releases. The phrase about dropping bombs into pickle barrels from 20,000 feet was repeated endlessly, despite being physically impossible. With a 20-power telescope, a bombardier could not even see a pickle barrel from that altitude, much less hit it. Aviation writer Don Sherman later calculated that the Norden's optical magnification was insufficient to visually identify a target that small from 4 miles above the Earth. The morale effect on American bomber crews was more complex. Many airmen genuinely believed they possessed superior equipment that gave them an advantage over the enemy. This belief helped sustain morale through the terrifying combat conditions of 1943 and 1944. Crews flying missions, where 1 in 4 aircraft never returned home, needed to believe their sacrifices were accomplishing something meaningful. The Norden bombsight provided tangible evidence that American technology was defeating German industry. Whether or not this was actually true mattered less than the psychological value of believing it. Some crews became disillusioned when they saw reconnaissance photographs showing their bombs had missed targets by wide margins. Others rationalized poor results as being due to weather, enemy action, or equipment malfunctions rather than fundamental limitations of the technology. A few recognized the truth that precision bombing as practiced in 1943 and 1944 was not significantly more accurate than area bombing, just more expensive and more dangerous because it required flying in tight formations at predictable altitudes, on steady headings toward targets the enemy could defend with concentrated firepower. The combined bomber offensive against Germany eventually succeeded in destroying German industrial capacity, but not through precision bombing of carefully selected bottleneck targets. What worked was overwhelming force, continuous attacks that kept German workers in shelters rather than factories, disruption of transportation networks, and finally the complete air supremacy achieved in 1944 when long-range escorts allowed American bombers to operate with acceptable losses. The specific accuracy of individual bomb strikes mattered less than the cumulative weight of explosives dropped on German cities and the broader impact on German morale and economic organization. By 1945, American bombers were routinely using radar bombing systems that were far less accurate than even the degraded performance of the Norden, but could bomb through cloud cover and at night. The H-2X radar system, nicknamed Mickey, allowed Pathfinder aircraft to identify coastal targets through radar returns from water boundaries. The radar images were crude compared to visual bombing, but they enabled operations in weather conditions that would have grounded visual bombing efforts entirely. Post-war analysis revealed that radar bombing and Norden visual bombing achieved roughly similar accuracy in operational use, approximately 30% of bombs within 1,000 feet. The final irony came at the end of the war, when Norden bomb sites dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Specially modified Norden devices were installed in the B-29 superfortresses Enola Gay and Boxcar. The bombardiers successfully delivered their weapons close enough to the aim points that the distinction between 75 feet and 1,200 feet was rendered meaningless. Nuclear weapons created destruction zones measured in miles, not feet. Pinpoint accuracy was irrelevant when the weapon itself devastated everything within a 2-mile radius. The Norden bombsight continued in American military service long after World War II ended. It was used extensively during the Korean War when B-29 seconds returned to combat operations. Retired World War II technicians had to be recalled to service to maintain and calibrate the devices because the institutional knowledge of their operation had largely disappeared. During the Vietnam War, The last combat use of the Norden occurred in 1967, when Navy aircraft used them to drop acoustic sensors along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. By then, the technology was decades obsolete, superseded by radar bombing systems and increasingly by precision-guided munitions that used their own guidance systems to home in on targets. The legacy of the Norden bombsight extends beyond its operational performance in World War II. The program demonstrated both the promise and the limitations of precision strike warfare using unguided weapons. Modern precision-guided munitions can achieve accuracy, measured in feet rather than hundreds of feet, but they do so by incorporating guidance systems into the weapons themselves, rather than relying on perfect release calculations. During the 1991 Gulf War, coalition forces dropped some 17,000 precision-guided munitions with mostly pinpoint accuracy, but also 210,000 conventional gravity bombs that missed their targets by an average of more than 300 feet, performing no better than World War II-era bombing. The fundamental problem the Norden attempted to solve remains unsolved for unguided gravity bombs. The physics of bomb ballistics involve too many unknowable variables. Air density changes with altitude. Wind conditions vary throughout the bomb's fall. The bomb itself tumbles and wobbles unpredictably. Atmospheric conditions at the moment of release differ from conditions measured minutes earlier during the bomb run. These factors combine to introduce errors that even perfect calculation cannot eliminate. Only by putting guidance systems on the weapons themselves can true precision be achieved. The story that began in September 1943 with General Eaker examining reconnaissance photographs of Schweinfurt reveals a profound truth about technological warfare. The gap between laboratory perfection and battlefield reality is often far wider than engineers or planners anticipate. The Norden bombsight, designed to hit targets within 75 feet from 20,000 feet, performed 16 times worse in actual combat. The billion-dollar secret weapon that was supposed to revolutionize strategic bombing achieved results no better than far simpler German designs that cost a fraction as much. And the enemy had known the bombsight's secrets all along, courtesy of a spy who walked the plans out of the Manhattan factory in his memory. American bomber crews who flew through flak and fighters believing their Norden bombsights gave them decisive technological advantage were operating under an illusion carefully maintained by propaganda and security theatre. The real advantages that eventually won the air war over Germany were industrial capacity, overwhelming numerical superiority, long-range fighter escorts, and the willingness to accept casualties that would have been politically unsustainable in peacetime. Technology mattered, but not in the way the Norden's promoters had promised. The lesson would be relearned in subsequent conflicts whenever precision bombing claims exceeded the messy realities of combat conditions. The photograph that trembled in General Eaker's hand that September morning in 1943 told a story that would take decades to fully acknowledge. The scattered bomb craters around Schweinfurt's factories, the residential areas hit by bombs intended for industrial targets, the conspicuous gaps where precision strikes should have landed, all of it contradicted the narrative that American technological superiority was winning the war through surgical strikes. But acknowledging this truth publicly would have undermined morale, questioned the enormous investment already made, and potentially derailed the entire strategic bombing campaign that Allied leadership believed was essential to victory. So the myth persisted, even as the evidence mounted. After each mission, intelligence officers compiled bombing accuracy reports that documented the gaps between expectations and results. These reports circulated among senior commanders, but rarely reached the public. Newspaper accounts continued, describing precision attacks on German industry. Newsreel footage showed bombs falling from B-17 seconds with voice-over narration claiming pinpoint accuracy. Training films demonstrated the Norden bombsight under ideal conditions, implying these results translated directly to combat. The disconnect between propaganda and reality grew wider with each passing month of operations over Germany. Bomber crews themselves lived in a strange psychological space between belief and doubt. Before missions, they attended briefings where intelligence officers pointed to specific buildings on reconnaissance photographs and explained exactly which aim points each bombardier should target. The implication was clear. With the Norden bombsight, Hitting those specific buildings from 25,000 feet through flak and fighters was not just possible but expected. Many bombardiers took pride in their skills, spending hours practicing on training ranges, studying wind tables, memorizing bomb ballistic charts. They wanted to believe their training and equipment made them precision weapons operators, rather than simply men dropping explosives from high altitude, hoping some would land near intended targets. But after missions, when reconnaissance photographs came back showing results, the cognitive dissonance was harder to ignore. A bombardier who had carefully tracked his target through the Norden's telescope, who had felt the autopilot making fine corrections in response to his inputs, who had watched his bombs fall away at the precisely calculated release point, that bombardier would then see photographs showing his bombs landed 300 yards from the target. What had gone wrong? Was it the wind calculation? Had the altitude setting been incorrect? Had flak disturbed the gyros at a critical moment? Or was the entire premise flawed? Some bombardiers blamed themselves, assuming errors in technique. Others blamed the equipment, noting that their specific bombsight had been malfunctioning or out of calibration. A few recognized the deeper truth that combat conditions simply could not replicate the controlled environment where the Norden's precision had been demonstrated. But most rationalized the results by focusing on the successful strikes while minimizing the misses. If even 20% of bombs hit the factory area, that was still damaging German production, they told themselves. The mission had value even if the precision was less than advertised. This rationalization extended up the chain of command. General Eaker and his staff knew the accuracy statistics. They understood that precision bombing as originally conceived was not achievable under combat conditions, but they also believed, correctly, that continuing the bombing campaign was strategically necessary. German fighter production had to be disrupted, ball-bearing supplies had to be reduced, oil refineries had to be destroyed, transportation networks had to be interdicted. These goals could be achieved even with reduced accuracy, provided enough bombers dropped enough bombs on enough missions. The Norden bombsight, even performing at a fraction of its design specifications, was still better than nothing. The strategic calculus evolved quietly, without public acknowledgement. Instead of precision strikes on individual buildings, missions targeted factory complexes where bombs scattered across several hundred yards would still hit something valuable. Instead of sending small numbers of bombers to hit specific aim points, massive formations of hundreds of aircraft saturated target areas with ordnance. The doctrine shifted from precision to concentration, from surgical strikes to overwhelming force. But the propaganda continued, describing precision bombing, because that narrative justified the casualties, explained the losses, and maintained public support for the campaign. German recognition of this reality came earlier than American acknowledgement. Luftwaffe intelligence officers, analyzing American bombing patterns throughout 1943, noted that actual accuracy fell far short of the precision the Norden bombsight supposedly provided. German civil defense officials observed that American bombs scattered widely around targets, often hitting residential areas that had no military value. German industrial managers learned to disperse manufacturing facilities, knowing that American bombers could not reliably hit small, specific buildings, even in clear weather with minimal opposition. Albert Speer's response to the Schweinfurt raids demonstrated this German understanding. After the August 17th attack, Speer did express concern about ball-bearing production disruption, but his immediate orders focused on dispersing manufacturing, building stockpiles, and identifying alternative suppliers rather than heavily fortifying existing factories. He recognized that American bombing was a strategic threat because of its sheer volume, not because of its precision. If the Americans kept coming back with hundreds of bombers, eventually they would destroy enough of the target area through concentration of force rather than accuracy of individual strikes. This German assessment was proven correct by subsequent operations. The October 14th second Schweinfurt raid damaged ball-bearing production again, but Germany compensated through dispersal and substitution. The massive bombing campaigns of 1944 against oil production facilities succeeded not because individual bombs hit specific refinery components, but because enough bombs fell in the general target area that critical infrastructure was inevitably destroyed. The transportation bombing campaign of early 1944 worked by hitting marshalling yards and rail junctions repeatedly until the cumulative damage paralyzed the system. Precision mattered less than persistence. The mathematical reality of unguided bomb delivery had been understood by ballisticians since the early days of aerial warfare, but this understanding had been overshadowed by the Norden's promotional claims. A bomb falling 4 miles through changing air densities, wind currents, and temperature gradients behaves in ways that cannot be perfectly predicted. The bomb itself is not a perfect aerodynamic shape. Manufacturing variations mean each bomb has slightly different ballistic characteristics. The bomb tumbles and yaws during descent, creating unpredictable forces. The best that can be achieved with unguided weapons is statistical accuracy across many drops, not precision on individual strikes. The Norden Bombsight's analog computer could calculate a theoretically perfect release point based on the data provided to it, but that calculation assumed the data was accurate. The equipment was functioning perfectly, the aircraft was flying exactly as indicated, and the bomb would fall along a predictable trajectory. In combat, none of these assumptions held consistently. Airspeed indicators could be off by 10 or 20 knots. Altitude readings could vary by hundreds of feet depending on local atmospheric pressure. Wind calculations were based on pre-mission forecasts that might be hours old by the time bombs were released. The gyroscopes could be precessing slightly from earlier maneuvers. Any one of these small errors would translate to large misses on the ground. The 75-foot circular error probable, achieved during testing, represented the best possible performance under ideal conditions. It was a ceiling, not a floor. Combat could only degrade that performance, never improve it. The 1,200 feet average error observed in 1943 combat operations represented the reality of what the system could actually deliver when all the degrading factors were present simultaneously. This was still better than random bombing, but it was nowhere near the precision required to hit individual buildings reliably from high altitude. American bombing doctrine was eventually forced to acknowledge this reality through the adoption of increasingly sophisticated formation tactics. Lead bombardier aircraft were specially selected and equipped. Pathfinder techniques using radar were developed for poor weather operations. Target marking with incendiaries and smoke became standard procedure. These adaptations implicitly admitted that individual bomb sites could not deliver the precision originally promised. Success required coordination, redundancy, and overwhelming force, rather than pinpoint accuracy from each aircraft. The crews flying these missions experienced the psychological cost of this doctrinal evolution. They had been told they were precision bombing operators, elite specialists using America's most advanced technology to strike critical targets with minimal collateral damage. The reality was that they were area bombing much of Germany with somewhat better aim than the RAF's night raids. The moral high ground that precision bombing was supposed to provide eroded as American bombs destroyed German cities just as thoroughly as British incendiaries, albeit during daylight hours with supposedly greater accuracy. Post-war bomber crew memoirs reveal this psychological complexity. Many veterans took pride in their service and believed they had contributed to victory. But some expressed discomfort about the gap between what they had been told they were doing and what they had actually accomplished. A bombardier who was assured his Norden could hit within 75 feet might spend decades wondering why his bombs in the reconnaissance photos always seemed to land hundreds of feet off target. Was it his fault? Was the equipment defective? Or had the entire premise been oversold? The financial cost of the Norden program takes on additional significance when viewed through this lens of actual performance versus promised capability. $1.1 billion in 1940s currency represented an enormous investment in a system that ultimately performed no better than far simpler and cheaper alternatives. That money could have built thousands more aircraft, trained thousands more aircrews, produced millions more tons of conventional ordnance. The opportunity cost was substantial. Resources devoted to manufacturing and maintaining 90,000 complex bomb sites might have been more effectively spent on other equipment. But this analysis applies hindsight that was not available to decision-makers in the 1930s and early 1940s. When the Norden demonstrated 75-foot accuracy in testing, The promise of precision bombing seemed worth any cost. The strategic benefits of destroying specific German factories while minimizing civilian casualties justified the expense. The moral arguments for precision over area bombing resonated with American political leadership. The technological prestige of possessing the world's most advanced bombsight had propaganda value beyond its tactical effectiveness. All these factors combined to create institutional momentum that continued long after evidence suggested the system was underperforming. Institutional resistance to acknowledging the Norden's limitations came from multiple sources. The Army Air Forces had built its entire strategic doctrine around precision daylight bombing. Admitting the Norden could not deliver promised accuracy would undermine arguments for an independent air force after the war. The manufacturers had lucrative contracts to protect. The training establishments had invested years developing bombardier instruction programs. Individual bombardiers had professional pride in their specialized skills. None of these stakeholders wanted to acknowledge that the emperor wore no clothes. Similar patterns of technological overconfidence and institutional resistance to contradictory evidence would recur in later conflicts. The Vietnam War saw over-optimistic assessments of bombing effectiveness, despite evidence that campaigns were not achieving stated objectives. The Gulf War featured dramatic video footage of precision-guided munitions hitting targets, while less attention was paid to the 210,000 conventional bombs that missed. The Afghanistan and Iraq conflicts repeated patterns of assumed technological superiority undermined by complex battlefield realities. The Norden bombsight story prefigured these later episodes. What makes the Norden case particularly striking is the contrast between the extreme security measures and the actual compromise of the technology. While armed guards escorted bombsights between storage and aircraft, while bombardiers swore oaths of secrecy, while the device carried the highest classifications, Hermann Lang was copying the complete blueprints from memory and delivering them to German intelligence. The elaborate security theater accomplished nothing except creating an illusion of protection that made the actual espionage more damaging when it was eventually discovered. The Duquesne spy ring that included Lang represented one of the largest espionage networks ever uncovered in the United States, with 33 members arrested in June 1941. The ring had been operating since the 1930s, collecting intelligence on American military technology, shipping movements, and industrial capacity. Lang's contribution of the Norden plans was considered one of the ring's most significant achievements. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover publicized the arrests as demonstrating the Bureau's effectiveness in counter-espionage, but the damage had already been done years earlier when Lang delivered the plans. The German decision not to copy the Norden directly speaks to the device's practical limitations. German engineers who examined Lang's reconstructed plans recognized that the bombsight was technologically impressive, but operationally complex. For Luftwaffe needs, simpler solutions were more practical. The Lot-Fernrohr 7 delivered comparable combat accuracy with dramatically reduced manufacturing costs, maintenance requirements, and training time. This German assessment proved correct. The side-by-side comparison of Norden and Lot-Fe 7 performance in combat showed little difference despite the enormous disparity in complexity and cost. Carl Norden himself remained convinced throughout his life that his bombsight was a war-winning technology. In post-war years, he gave occasional interviews where he described the device's capabilities and took pride in its contribution to victory. He seemed genuinely to believe that the 75-foot accuracy demonstrated in testing represented typical combat performance. Whether he was unaware of the actual combat statistics, chose to ignore them, or rationalized them as reflecting operator error rather than system limitations is unclear. His public statements always emphasized the device's theoretical capabilities rather than its operational results. The company Norden founded continued manufacturing precision instruments after the war, transitioning from bombsights to other aerospace and defense applications. The ball-bearing plant he established, Baden Company, remained in operation and ironically became part of a German industrial group decades later. The technological expertise developed for the bombsight program contributed to post-war developments in guidance systems, analog computers, and precision manufacturing. In this sense, the investment in Norden technology had spillover benefits beyond the combat effectiveness of the bombsight itself. Modern precision-guided munitions represent the fulfillment of what the Norden bombsight attempted to achieve. By incorporating guidance systems directly into weapons, modern smart bombs can adjust their trajectory during flight to compensate for all the variables that degraded Norden accuracy. Laser-guided bombs home in on reflected energy from target designators. GPS-guided weapons navigate to precise coordinates regardless of weather or visibility. These systems achieve the precision that Norden promised but could never deliver using pre-calculated release points for unguided weapons. The technological lesson is clear. Precision attack of point targets from high altitude requires guided weapons, not merely accurate release calculations. The physics of unguided bomb ballistics impose limitations that cannot be overcome through better computers, better optics, or better training. The Norden bombsight pushed unguided bombing accuracy to its theoretical limits. Combat results demonstrated that those limits fell far short of the precision required for reliably hitting specific buildings from 20,000 feet under operational conditions. The historical significance of the Norden bombsight story extends beyond questions of technological effectiveness. It illuminates the gap between institutional narratives and operational realities that characterizes much of military history. Official accounts emphasize successes while minimizing failures. Propaganda requirements shape public understanding in ways that diverge from classified assessments. Individual participants operate based on incomplete information about larger contexts. The mythology surrounding the Norden demonstrates how these factors can create and sustain beliefs that persist despite contradictory evidence. For the bomber crews who flew missions over Germany in 1943 and 1944, the Norden bombsight was simultaneously a technological marvel and a source of frustration. They relied on it for their missions, trained extensively on its operation, and wanted to believe in its capabilities. But they also saw the reconnaissance photographs showing their bombs missing targets. They knew friends who died on missions that failed to destroy their objectives. They experienced the terror of flying straight and level through flak during bomb runs that the Norden required, but that made them vulnerable to enemy fire. Their relationship with the technology was complex, mixing pride, doubt, and resignation. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.